Most people don't lose because they're weak. They lose because they're addicted to being liked. Let that sit with you for a moment. How much of your life has been shaped by the fear of disappointing someone? How many opportunities have you missed? How many boundaries have you ignored? And how many times have you betrayed your own instincts simply to keep the peace? It burns, doesn't it? Realizing that some of your greatest frustrations may not have come from other people at all, but from the countless moments you abandoned yourself to earn approval. You tell yourself you're being kind, mature, understanding, and patient. But what if much of that isn't virtue? What if it's fear disguised as virtue? What if the very behaviors you believe make you a good person are the same behaviors quietly destroying your confidence, draining your energy, and teaching others to take your value for granted? The Stoics confronted this uncomfortable truth centuries ago. Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, and Seneca understood that the greatest threat to freedom is not criticism, rejection, or conflict. It is allowing your peace to depend on things you cannot control, especially the opinions of other people. Stoicism teaches that the moment you build your identity on approval, you hand over your power. You become reactive instead of intentional, dependent instead of free, and fearful instead of strong. So in this video, we're going to uncover the hidden cost of people-pleasing, the psychological trap of seeking validation, and the Stoic principles that can help you stop acting nice to survive and start living with the quiet confidence of someone who no longer needs the world's permission to be themselves. And if you're someone who values wisdom over popularity, character over image, and personal growth over empty validation, consider subscribing and becoming part of this journey, because every step toward self-mastery begins with a willingness to face the truths most people spend their lives avoiding. There is a pattern that quietly shapes the lives of millions of people, yet very few ever stop long enough to recognize it. It does not announce itself as a weakness. It rarely appears as a flaw. In fact, most of the time it disguises itself as one of the most socially celebrated qualities a person can possess. It appears as kindness, it appears as patience, it appears as generosity, understanding, flexibility, and emotional maturity. People who fall into this pattern are often praised throughout their lives. They become the dependable friend, the supportive partner, the understanding co-worker, the person who always finds a way to make things easier for everyone else. From the outside, their behavior seems admirable. From the outside, it seems like evidence of strong character. Yet beneath that image, there is often a hidden cost that grows larger with every passing year. The cost is rarely visible at first because it accumulates slowly, almost invisibly, until one day a person finds themselves feeling exhausted, overlooked, resentful, and strangely disconnected from their own needs. What they eventually discover is something uncomfortable but deeply important. They discover that much of what they believed was kindness was actually driven by something else. It was driven by a desire to avoid tension, avoid rejection, avoid criticism, avoid conflict, and avoid the possibility that someone might not approve of them. This realization is difficult because it challenges an identity many people have carried for most of their lives. After all, nobody wants to think of themselves as approval-seeking. Most people prefer to believe they are simply being considerate. They tell themselves they are keeping the peace. They tell themselves they are being the bigger person. They tell themselves they are maintaining harmony. And sometimes that is true. Genuine kindness is one of the highest virtues a person can cultivate. The Stoics themselves spoke often about justice, compassion, and treating others with dignity. However, the Stoics also understood something that modern society often forgets. A virtue stops being a virtue the moment it becomes disconnected from wisdom. Kindness without wisdom becomes self-neglect. Patience without wisdom becomes tolerance of disrespect. Generosity without wisdom becomes exploitation. Understanding without wisdom becomes permission for others to continue crossing boundaries they should never have crossed in the first place. This is why Stoicism was never simply about being good. It was about being good intelligently. It was about aligning your actions with reason rather than emotion, with principles rather than impulses, and with character rather than social approval. If you examine your own life honestly, you may begin to notice how often your decisions have been influenced by the desire to maintain comfort rather than the desire to honor truth. Think about the conversations you avoided because you did not want someone to become upset. Think about the opportunities you declined because you feared being judged. Think about the boundaries you failed to establish because you worried that someone might see you differently. Think about the moments when you knew exactly what needed to be said, yet remained silent because silence felt safer than honesty. Most people experience these situations so frequently that they stop noticing them. The behavior becomes automatic. They adjust themselves to fit the expectations of others. They soften opinions that should be expressed clearly. They apologize for decisions that require no apology. They over-explain simple choices because they feel responsible for managing everyone else's emotional reactions. Over time, they become experts at reading rooms, sensing moods, anticipating discomfort, and adapting themselves accordingly. What they do not realize is that every adaptation comes with a small psychological cost. Every unnecessary compromise weakens the connection between who they are and how they behave. Every act of self-abandonment teaches the mind a dangerous lesson. It teaches the mind that acceptance is more important than authenticity. The tragedy is that this lesson often begins very early in life. Many people learned as children that approval brought safety while disapproval brought discomfort. They learned that being agreeable earned praise. They learned that compliance reduced conflict. They learned that making others happy often resulted in rewards, while expressing difficult emotions sometimes resulted in criticism or rejection. Without realizing it, they began developing a strategy for navigating the world. The strategy seemed effective because it worked in the short term. Be pleasant, be accommodating, be easy to manage. Avoid upsetting people, avoid creating problems, gain approval whenever possible. Yet what protects us as children can imprison us as adults. The same habits that once helped us feel accepted can eventually prevent us from becoming fully ourselves. The same patterns that once created safety can later create dependency. Suddenly, a person finds themselves unable to make decisions confidently unless others approve. They struggle to express disagreement without guilt. They feel responsible for emotions they did not create and problems they did not cause. Their life slowly becomes organized around managing perception rather than pursuing purpose. Marcus Aurelius understood this struggle perhaps better than most people realize. Although history remembers him as an emperor, it is important to remember that he was also a human being surrounded by constant judgment. Every decision he made was scrutinized. Every action was interpreted, every choice was criticized by someone and praised by someone else. He lived in an environment where approval was unstable and public opinion shifted constantly. Yet throughout his writings, he repeatedly returned to one simple truth: the opinions of others belong to them. Your character belongs to you. This distinction may seem small at first glance, but it has enormous implications. If your self-worth depends on opinions, then your self-worth becomes unstable because opinions themselves are unstable. People change their minds. Circumstances change. Relationships change. Social expectations change. If your identity is built on something that changes constantly, then your emotional foundation can never become truly secure. The Stoics recognized this problem and proposed a radical alternative. Instead of measuring yourself by how others perceive you, measure yourself by whether your actions align with your values. Instead of asking whether people approve, ask whether you acted with integrity. Instead of chasing admiration, Focus on developing character. This sounds straightforward in theory, but it becomes much more challenging in practice because human beings naturally desire social acceptance. We want to be understood. We want to belong. We want to feel valued by the people around us. There is nothing wrong with these desires. The problem emerges when those desires begin controlling behavior. The problem emerges when approval becomes a requirement rather than a preference. There is a profound difference between appreciating approval and depending on it. Appreciation allows you to enjoy positive feedback without becoming attached to it. Dependence forces you to pursue approval, even when doing so requires sacrificing your own interests, values, and peace of mind. The dependent person constantly monitors reactions. They analyze expressions. They replay conversations. They worry about whether someone misunderstood them. They spend enormous amounts of energy attempting to control perceptions that were never theirs to control in the first place. The irony is that this pursuit rarely produces the respect people hope it will. In fact, it often creates the opposite outcome. Human beings instinctively respond differently to those who appear desperate for approval. When someone constantly adjusts themselves to avoid disapproval, they communicate uncertainty. They communicate that external validation holds significant power over them. Whether consciously or unconsciously, people notice this. They begin expecting accommodation. They begin expecting flexibility. They begin expecting exceptions. Eventually, what once appeared generous begins to look available. What once appeared thoughtful begins to look predictable. What once appeared kind begins to look weak. This does not happen because people are cruel. It happens because human psychology naturally assigns value to what demonstrates self-respect. When someone respects themselves enough to establish boundaries, maintain standards, and tolerate occasional disapproval, others often respond with increased respect. When someone abandons their standards whenever tension arises, others gradually learn that those standards are negotiable. This is where Stoicism introduces a perspective that can feel uncomfortable but ultimately liberating. The Stoics taught that discomfort is not necessarily something to avoid. In many cases, discomfort is simply evidence that growth is taking place. Consider physical training. Muscles grow through resistance. Strength develops through challenge. Endurance emerges through repeated exposure to difficulty. The same principle applies psychologically. Every time you tolerate a difficult conversation instead of avoiding it, you strengthen your ability to handle tension. Every time you express a boundary without apologizing for it, you strengthen your self-respect. Every time you allow someone to disagree with you without rushing to defend yourself, you strengthen your emotional independence. Growth occurs not by escaping discomfort, but by learning to remain steady within it. Most people spend their lives believing that peace comes from eliminating tension. The Stoics understood that genuine peace comes from eliminating fear of tension. There is an enormous difference between those two approaches. The first requires controlling the world. The second requires mastering yourself. One is impossible, the other is attainable. When you stop viewing every uncomfortable interaction as a threat, something remarkable begins to happen. You become less reactive, you become less anxious, you become less dependent on approval because you no longer view disagreement as evidence that something is wrong. Instead, you begin viewing disagreement as a normal part of life. You begin understanding that another person's reaction does not automatically determine whether your decision was correct. You begin realizing that discomfort can exist without danger, and that criticism can exist without catastrophe. This shift changes the way you move through the world. You stop rushing to repair every misunderstanding. You stop treating every disagreement as a crisis. You stop assuming responsibility for emotions that belong to other people. Instead, you focus your attention where the Stoics always directed theirs, toward what remains within your control, your thoughts, your actions, your choices, your character. The more attention you invest in these areas, the less power external approval holds over you. Gradually, almost without noticing it, you begin reclaiming pieces of yourself that were previously surrendered to fear. You begin speaking more honestly. You begin acting more deliberately. You begin making decisions based on principles rather than reactions. And perhaps for the first time in a very long time, you begin experiencing something that cannot be purchased, negotiated, or granted by anyone else. You begin experiencing the quiet confidence that emerges when your behavior is no longer organized around being liked, but around being true to who you are. The challenge, however, is that understanding this idea intellectually is very different from living it consistently. Most people can agree that self-respect is more important than approval when they hear it in a video, read it in a book, or encounter it in a motivational quote. The difficulty begins the moment real life presents a test. The difficulty begins when someone important disagrees with you. It begins when someone questions your decision, criticizes your actions, rejects your efforts, or responds negatively to a boundary you finally gathered the courage to establish. Suddenly, the philosophy that sounded so clear in theory becomes emotionally complicated in practice. This is where many people discover that their attachment to approval runs much deeper than they originally believed. The reason this attachment is so powerful is because approval often provides something that appears to resemble security. When people agree with us, we feel safe. When they praise us, we feel validated. When they support our decisions, we feel reassured. These experiences create a temporary sense of certainty that the human mind naturally enjoys. The problem is that certainty based on external reactions can never remain stable because other people are not stable. Their moods change, their priorities change, their expectations change, their opinions change. If your emotional foundation depends upon something that changes constantly, then your emotional state will change constantly as well. One day you feel confident because everyone supports you. The next day you feel uncertain because someone questions you. The day after that you feel discouraged because someone disapproves of a decision you made. Without realizing it, you have handed over the keys to your inner world and allowed external circumstances to determine how you experience yourself. This is precisely why the Stoics placed so much emphasis on internal authority. They understood that the person who cannot govern themselves will eventually be governed by everything around them. Their emotions will be dictated by circumstances. Their confidence will be dictated by approval. Their decisions will be dictated by fear. Their peace will be dictated by events they cannot control. Such a person may appear successful from the outside, but internally they remain dependent upon forces that shift every day. Marcus Aurelius repeatedly reminded himself that the opinions of others belong to them, just as their actions belong to them. His responsibility was not to manage every judgment that existed in the minds of other people. His responsibility was to govern his own thoughts and conduct. This perspective sounds simple, yet if fully understood, it has the power to transform nearly every relationship in your life. Imagine how differently you would move through the world if you genuinely accepted that not everyone needs to agree with you. Imagine how much energy would become available if you stopped trying to convince everyone that your decisions were justified. Imagine how much peace you would experience if you no longer felt obligated to explain every choice, defend every boundary, and manage every misunderstanding. Most people have never experienced this kind of freedom because they spend so much of their lives carrying responsibilities that were never theirs to begin with. They feel responsible for how other people interpret them. They feel responsible for preventing disappointment. They feel responsible for ensuring that everyone remains comfortable. They feel responsible for maintaining harmony at all costs. The burden becomes so familiar that they stop questioning whether it is reasonable. What makes this pattern particularly dangerous is that it often masquerades as virtue. The person who constantly explains themselves believes they are being considerate. The person who never says no believes they are being generous. The person who avoids difficult conversations believes they are being compassionate. Yet beneath these behaviors, there is frequently a hidden motivation that goes unexamined. The motivation is not kindness. The motivation is fear. It is the fear that honesty might create discomfort. It is the fear that boundaries might create distance. It is the fear that disagreement might lead to rejection. As long as fear remains hidden behind the language of virtue, it becomes difficult to challenge. After all, who wants to question their own kindness? Who wants to admit that what appears noble on the surface may actually be rooted in insecurity? This is why self-awareness becomes one of the most powerful forms of strength. The Stoics placed enormous importance on observing one's own mind because they understood that people are often strangers to their own motivations. A person may believe they are acting out of generosity when they are actually acting out of fear. They may believe they are maintaining peace when they are actually avoiding necessary conflict. They may believe they are preserving a relationship when they are actually sacrificing themselves to sustain it. Without self-examination, these distinctions remain invisible. With self-examination, they become impossible to ignore. Consider how many times you have agreed to something you did not truly want to do. In the moment, it may have felt easier than refusing. Saying yes preserved harmony. Saying yes avoided awkwardness. Saying yes prevented disappointment. Yet what happened afterward? Perhaps you felt resentment. Perhaps you felt drained. Perhaps you wondered why people seemed to expect so much from you. What many people fail to realize is that expectations are often created through repeated patterns. Every time you communicate that your needs come second, you teach others to place them second as well. Every time you tolerate behavior that violates your standards, you teach others that those standards are flexible. Every time you prioritize approval over authenticity, you reinforce the belief that acceptance is worth more than self-respect. This realization can feel uncomfortable because it forces us to confront an important truth. Much of what frustrates us about other people's behavior is sometimes connected to the behavior we have repeatedly allowed. This does not mean others are blameless. It does not mean disrespect is acceptable. It simply means that personal responsibility begins where personal power begins. If you recognize your role in creating certain patterns, you also recognize your ability to change them. The moment you stop viewing yourself as a passive participant in your own life, everything starts to shift. One of the most significant shifts occurs when you stop seeing tension as an enemy. Most approval-seeking behavior is fundamentally an attempt to avoid tension. People over-explain because they want to eliminate uncertainty. They apologize because they want to eliminate discomfort. They accommodate because they want to eliminate conflict. Yet, tension itself is not the problem. In many situations, tension is simply the natural consequence of honesty. It is the natural consequence of boundaries. It is the natural consequence of self-respect. The Stoics understood that a person who fears tension becomes easy to manipulate because anyone who controls their comfort controls their behavior. Think about how often people abandon their own position the moment discomfort enters the conversation. Someone challenges them, so they retreat. Someone disapproves, so they adjust. Someone becomes upset, so they immediately begin negotiating their own standards. Over time, this creates a dangerous habit. The habit teaches the mind that discomfort must be escaped rather than endured. The problem is that every meaningful form of growth requires endurance. Physical growth requires enduring exertion. Intellectual growth requires enduring confusion. Emotional growth requires enduring discomfort. There is no path around it. The only question is whether you will face that discomfort consciously or spend your life avoiding it. Seneca wrote extensively about the tendency of human beings to suffer more in imagination than in reality. This observation becomes particularly relevant when discussing approval. Many of the situations people fear never actually occur. They imagine rejection, they imagine conflict, they imagine criticism, they imagine consequences that may never happen. Then they alter their behavior based on these imagined outcomes. Their actions become guided not by reality, but by anticipation. The Stoics recognized this tendency and encouraged people to return their attention to what is actually happening rather than what might happen. This practice creates tremendous psychological freedom because it reduces the influence of fear over decision-making. As you begin applying these ideas, something interesting starts to happen. You realize that much of your previous anxiety came not from circumstances themselves, but from the effort required to control them. You realize how exhausting it is to constantly monitor reactions, anticipate responses, and manage perceptions. You realize how much energy has been invested in maintaining an image that was never fully authentic. Most importantly, you begin noticing how much strength becomes available once that energy is reclaimed. The transformation does not happen all at once. In fact, it often begins in very small moments. You express an opinion without immediately qualifying it. You decline a request without constructing an elaborate explanation. You allow someone to disagree with you without rushing to change their mind. You remain silent when silence serves you better than justification. These actions may seem insignificant, but psychologically they represent a profound shift. They signal that your decisions are no longer being dictated entirely by the pursuit of approval. They signal that your sense of self is becoming more stable, more grounded, and less dependent upon external validation. Over time, this stability becomes visible. People notice it even when they cannot explain it. There is something different about individuals who no longer organize their lives around being liked. Their words carry more weight because they are not constantly adjusting them. Their boundaries appear stronger because they are not constantly negotiating them. Their presence feels calmer because they are not constantly seeking reassurance. They are not trying to dominate others. They are not trying to appear superior. They simply possess something increasingly rare in the modern world. They possess an internal center that remains intact regardless of changing opinions, changing circumstances, and changing reactions. And once you begin developing that internal center, you discover that the respect you spent years chasing indirectly through approval starts arriving naturally through consistency. Not because you demanded it, not because you manipulated anyone, but because people instinctively recognize when a person has stopped negotiating their identity in exchange for acceptance. That recognition changes every interaction, every relationship, and eventually the entire direction of a life. As this transformation continues, another truth begins to emerge, and for many people, it is one of the most difficult truths to accept. The majority of emotional suffering does not come from what happens to us. It comes from how quickly we surrender control of ourselves when something happens. Most people never notice this because the process occurs so automatically that it feels natural. Someone criticizes them and they immediately become defensive. Someone ignores them and they immediately begin questioning their worth. Someone disagrees with them and they instantly feel compelled to explain, justify, persuade, or prove. The reaction happens so quickly that there appears to be no space between the event and the response. Yet, the Stoics built an entire philosophy around understanding that space because within that space lies the difference between being controlled by circumstances and mastering them. One of the reasons approval-seeking becomes so deeply rooted is because it conditions people to react rather than observe. The moment something uncomfortable occurs, the mind immediately begins searching for a way to restore emotional comfort. If someone expresses disappointment, the approval seeker wants to fix it. If someone becomes upset, the approval seeker wants to resolve it. If someone misunderstands them, the approval seeker wants to clarify immediately. Everything becomes urgent because emotional discomfort feels dangerous. The nervous system interprets tension as a threat that must be removed as quickly as possible. As a result, people spend years responding impulsively to situations that would have benefited from patience. Marcus Aurelius repeatedly emphasized the importance of examining impressions before accepting them as truth. This may sound abstract at first, but it becomes incredibly practical when applied to daily life. Imagine someone responds coldly to you. Most people instantly create a story. They assume they did something wrong. They assume the other person is upset. They assume a problem exists. Then they react to the story they created rather than the reality they observed. What began as a simple interaction becomes an emotional burden entirely because assumptions were accepted as facts. The Stoic approach is different. Instead of immediately accepting an impression, you examine it. You ask yourself whether you actually know what is happening. You ask whether your interpretation is accurate. You ask whether your reaction is helping or harming you. This habit creates emotional distance between the event and the response, and within that distance, wisdom becomes possible. Unfortunately, modern life encourages the opposite approach. Everything around us rewards immediacy. Messages arrive instantly. Responses are expected instantly. Opinions are formed instantly. Judgments are delivered instantly. Entire reputations can be built or destroyed within moments. People become conditioned to believe that speed equals competence. Yet when it comes to emotional mastery, speed often creates weakness. The faster you react, the less control you have over the direction of your response. The slower you become internally, the more freedom you gain. This does not mean becoming passive. It means becoming deliberate. Think about the individuals who possess the strongest presence in any room. They are rarely the loudest. They are rarely the most aggressive. They are rarely the quickest to respond. More often, they possess a certain calmness that influences the entire environment around them. When tension appears, they do not immediately absorb it. When criticism appears, they do not immediately collapse under it. When disagreement appears, they do not immediately abandon their position. They create space. They observe. They assess. Their composure communicates something powerful before they even speak. It communicates that they are not easily moved. This quality is becoming increasingly rare because modern culture often mistakes emotional intensity for strength. People admire dramatic reactions. They admire immediate responses. They admire passionate outbursts. Yet, from a Stoic perspective, true strength reveals itself differently. True strength is demonstrated when emotions are present but do not dictate behavior. True strength is demonstrated when anger exists but does not control actions. True strength is demonstrated when fear appears but does not determine decisions. The absence of emotion is not strength. The ability to govern emotion is. Many people spend years trying to appear powerful without realizing that power often grows from restraint. Consider how often individuals weaken their own position through excessive explanation. The moment someone questions them, they begin providing lengthy justifications. The moment someone expresses doubt, they begin presenting evidence. The moment someone disagrees, they begin defending every detail of their decision. While this behavior may seem reasonable, it often reveals insecurity rather than confidence. Confident people do not feel compelled to convince everyone. They understand that disagreement is inevitable. They understand that misunderstanding is inevitable. Most importantly, they understand that their peace cannot depend on universal agreement because universal agreement has never existed and never will. This realization becomes particularly important when dealing with criticism. Criticism has a unique ability to expose hidden dependencies because it immediately reveals where approval still holds power. If a stranger criticizes you and it consumes your thoughts for days, that reaction reveals something important. If a coworker questions your decision and you cannot stop replaying the interaction, that reaction reveals something important. If a friend disapproves of your choice and you instantly begin doubting yourself, that reaction reveals something important. The issue is rarely the criticism itself. The issue is the authority we grant it. The Stoics were careful not to dismiss criticism entirely. In fact, they encouraged self-examination. If criticism contained truth, they believed it should be welcomed because truth helps improve character. If criticism contained falsehood, they believed it should be ignored because falsehood cannot damage character unless we allow it to. This perspective removes much of the emotional chaos surrounding judgment. Instead of asking whether criticism feels good or bad, the Stoic asks whether it is useful. If it is useful, it becomes information. If it is not useful, it becomes noise. Either way, it does not determine self-worth. Imagine how much psychological freedom becomes available when you stop treating every opinion as a verdict on your value. Imagine how much energy becomes available when you stop carrying every criticism long after it has occurred. Most people underestimate how much of their emotional exhaustion comes from mental repetition. They replay conversations repeatedly. They revisit mistakes repeatedly. They relive embarrassing moments repeatedly. Their suffering continues long after the event itself has ended because the mind keeps recreating it. Marcus Aurelius warned against this tendency. He understood that human beings often create secondary suffering by refusing to release experiences that have already passed. This is where emotional discipline begins transforming into something larger. At first, the goal may simply be reducing anxiety or becoming less reactive. Eventually, however, a deeper transformation occurs. You begin realizing that your attention is one of your most valuable resources. Wherever attention goes, energy follows. Whatever occupies your mind repeatedly gains influence over your emotional state. If your attention remains trapped in old conflicts, old disappointments, and old judgments, then those experiences continue shaping your present reality. If your attention becomes intentional, your life becomes intentional as well. The approval seeker rarely controls attention consciously. Their attention is constantly pulled outward. They monitor reactions, they monitor perceptions, they monitor approval. Their focus remains fixed on external conditions they cannot fully control. The Stoic gradually reverses this pattern. Instead of asking how others perceive them, they ask whether they are living according to their values. Instead of asking whether everyone approves, they ask whether they acted with integrity. Instead of asking whether criticism exists, they ask whether criticism contains wisdom. The center of gravity shifts inward. As this shift deepens, social interactions begin changing in subtle but significant ways. You stop entering conversations with the unconscious goal of being liked. You stop treating every interaction as an opportunity to gain validation. You stop measuring success by approval. Interestingly, this often makes people more attractive, more influential, and more respected. Not because they are trying harder, but because they are trying less. Desperation disappears. Neediness disappears. Excessive self-monitoring disappears. What remains is authenticity, and authenticity possesses a quiet power that people instinctively recognize. There is another reason this change matters. The more dependent you become on approval, the easier you become to manipulate. Anyone who understands your need for validation can influence your decisions. They can withhold approval to create anxiety. They can offer approval to create compliance. They can shape your behavior by controlling access to acceptance. This dynamic exists in workplaces, friendships, relationships, families, and social groups everywhere. Most people do not recognize it because it often appears in subtle forms rather than obvious ones. Yet the mechanism remains the same. The greater your dependence on external validation, the less freedom you possess. The Stoics pursued freedom relentlessly, but not the kind of freedom most people imagine. They were not obsessed with wealth, status, or power over others. They sought freedom from unnecessary dependence, freedom from uncontrolled desires, freedom from destructive fears, freedom from emotional slavery to circumstances outside their control. Approval was included in that category because anything capable of controlling your behavior possesses power over you. This does not mean becoming indifferent to relationships. It does not mean becoming isolated. It does not mean rejecting connection. Human relationships remain one of life's greatest gifts. The difference is that healthy relationships emerge from choice rather than dependence. They emerge from mutual respect rather than emotional necessity. When approval becomes optional rather than essential, relationships improve because authenticity becomes possible. You no longer interact with people as someone seeking permission to be accepted. You interact with them as someone who already accepts themselves. And perhaps that is one of the most profound shifts a person can experience. The moment you stop searching for constant validation from the outside world, you begin discovering something far more stable within yourself. You begin discovering that confidence is not built through praise. It is built through consistency. It is built through keeping promises to yourself. It is built through acting according to principles even when doing so creates discomfort. It is built through demonstrating to yourself repeatedly that your values matter more than temporary approval. Once that process begins, life becomes noticeably different. The same situations that once triggered anxiety lose much of their power. The same judgments that once felt overwhelming lose much of their significance. The same fears that once dictated decisions begin fading into the background, not because the world changed, but because your relationship to the world changed. And when your relationship to the world changes, everything else begins changing with it. As this inner stability begins to grow, another transformation quietly starts taking place. One that many people never anticipate because they spend so much of their lives focusing on how they feel that they rarely stop to examine how they are perceived. The Stoics understood that while we should never become prisoners of public opinion, we should also recognize that reputation is not irrelevant. Reputation is the accumulated memory of our actions in the minds of other people. It is formed through repeated observations, repeated experiences, and repeated patterns. Every interaction leaves an impression. Every decision communicates something. Every reaction teaches people how to interpret us. Over time, those interpretations become expectations, and those expectations begin shaping the way others engage with us. Most people allow this process to happen unconsciously. They move through life reacting to situations without considering the larger narrative they are creating. They assume that good intentions will automatically produce the reputation they desire. Unfortunately, human psychology does not work that way. People cannot see intentions. They can only see behavior. They cannot access your motives directly. They can only observe your actions repeatedly over time and draw conclusions from what they see. This means that every unnecessary compromise, every tolerated disrespect, every abandoned boundary, and every act of self-neglect contributes to a story that other people gradually construct about who you are. This realization is not meant to create anxiety. It is meant to create awareness. There is an enormous difference between becoming obsessed with what people think and becoming conscious of what your behavior communicates. The first creates insecurity, the second creates wisdom. One hands power to others, the other helps you understand the effects of your choices. Stoicism was never about pretending that social dynamics do not exist. It was about ensuring that social dynamics never become more important than character. Once character becomes the foundation, reputation becomes a natural byproduct rather than an unhealthy obsession. Many people spend years wondering why they feel overlooked, underestimated, or taken for granted. They assume the answer lies in other people. They assume they simply have not met the right friends, the right colleagues, the right partner, or the right environment. While circumstances certainly matter, there is often another factor operating beneath the surface. The image they have unintentionally created does not align with the respect they hope to receive. They have taught others that their boundaries are flexible. They have taught others that their time is always available. They have taught others that their needs can be postponed indefinitely. They have taught others that disagreement will cause them to retreat. None of this happened intentionally. In most cases, it happened gradually through years of prioritizing comfort over clarity. This is where one of the most important lessons of Stoicism begins to reveal itself. Respect is not something you demand, it is something you teach. Every day, through hundreds of small decisions, you teach people how to interact with you. You teach them how seriously to take your words. You teach them how much access they have to your energy. You teach them whether your standards are firm or negotiable. You teach them whether your boundaries matter. This teaching process never stops. Even silence teaches. Even inaction teaches. Even avoidance teaches. The question is not whether you are teaching people how to treat you. The question is what exactly you are teaching them. For many people, this realization can feel uncomfortable because it requires abandoning a deeply rooted belief. The belief is that being endlessly accommodating will eventually produce appreciation. Unfortunately, reality often follows a different pattern. What is consistently available tends to become expected. What is expected eventually loses its perceived value. Human beings naturally appreciate scarcity. They appreciate what requires effort. They appreciate what possesses limits. This principle applies not only to material things, but also to psychological resources. Time, attention, emotional support, patience, understanding, and availability all gain value when they are distributed intentionally rather than automatically. Consider the difference between someone who offers support selectively and someone who offers support endlessly. The first person's support feels meaningful because it reflects conscious investment. The second person's support often becomes invisible because it is assumed. This is not because people are ungrateful, it is because human beings adapt quickly to whatever becomes normal. Once something becomes normal, appreciation tends to decrease. The Stoics understood this tendency and encouraged moderation in all things, including generosity. They recognized that wisdom requires discernment. Giving is virtuous. Giving without judgment is often destructive. This brings us to one of the most misunderstood concepts in personal development. Many people believe that becoming stronger requires becoming harder. They assume that self-respect requires coldness, detachment, or emotional distance. The Stoics taught something very different. They believed strength and compassion could coexist. They believed kindness and boundaries could coexist. They believed generosity and self-respect could coexist. The key was not eliminating kindness, the key was eliminating fear. When kindness is motivated by fear, it becomes weakness. When kindness is motivated by principle, it becomes strength. There is a profound difference between helping someone because you choose to help them and helping someone because you are afraid of disappointing them. The external behavior may look similar, but the internal reality is completely different. One emerges from freedom, the other emerges from dependency. One strengthens self-respect, the other weakens it. This distinction becomes increasingly important as you continue developing emotional independence because it allows you to evaluate your actions more honestly. Instead of asking whether you are being nice, you begin asking why you are being nice. Instead of asking whether you are helping, you begin asking whether your help is truly beneficial. Instead of asking whether someone approves, you begin asking whether your actions align with your values. As these questions become habitual, your relationships begin changing in subtle but powerful ways. You become less reactive. You become less eager to earn validation. You become less willing to sacrifice your well-being for temporary approval. Interestingly, many people worry that this transformation will damage their relationships. In reality, it often improves them. Healthy relationships thrive when both individuals possess self-respect. Healthy relationships thrive when honesty becomes possible. Healthy relationships thrive when boundaries exist because boundaries create clarity. Without clarity, resentment eventually replaces connection. Resentment is one of the clearest signs that a person has been betraying their own needs for too long. Resentment rarely appears suddenly. It accumulates slowly through repeated acts of self-abandonment. Every time you say yes when you mean no, a small amount accumulates. Every time you remain silent when you should speak, a small amount accumulates. Every time you prioritize someone else's comfort at the expense of your own integrity, a small amount accumulates. Eventually, the emotional debt becomes impossible to ignore. The frustration that emerges is often directed outward, but its true source lies deeper. It comes from recognizing that you have participated in creating the situation you now resent. The Stoics believed that awareness of this pattern was not a reason for guilt, but an opportunity for growth. Guilt keeps attention trapped in the past. Growth directs attention toward the future. Once you recognize a pattern, you gain the ability to change it. This is where personal power begins. Personal power is not dominance over others. It is the ability to direct yourself consciously rather than automatically. It is the ability to act according to principles rather than impulses. It is the ability to maintain alignment between your values and your behavior, even when doing so creates temporary discomfort. As this ability strengthens, something fascinating begins happening within social dynamics. People start responding to you differently. They may not consciously understand why. They may not even notice the specific changes you have made. Yet they sense something. They sense that you are no longer operating from the same psychological framework. They sense that approval is no longer your primary objective. They sense that your decisions are being guided by something deeper than immediate emotional comfort. This changes the atmosphere of interactions because people naturally respond differently to individuals who possess a strong internal center. A strong internal center cannot be manufactured through appearance. It cannot be created through confidence tricks or communication techniques. It emerges from repeated acts of integrity. It emerges from repeatedly choosing what is right over what is easy. It emerges from consistently honoring your values even when external rewards are absent. Over time, these choices accumulate. They form characters. Character forms reputation. Reputation influences perception. Perception influences interactions. What began as an internal transformation gradually reshapes your external reality. This is why the Stoics devoted so much attention to character. They understood that character eventually becomes visible, not through dramatic declarations or impressive speeches, but through patterns. Human beings reveal themselves through patterns. A single action means very little. Repeated actions mean everything. Anyone can appear disciplined for a day. Anyone can appear confident for a moment. Anyone can appear courageous under favorable circumstances. Character is revealed through consistency. It is revealed when pressure appears. It is revealed when circumstances become uncomfortable. It is revealed when nobody is watching. Most people spend far too much energy trying to manage perception directly when perception is actually the result of something deeper. It is the result of consistent behavior over time. The person who focuses entirely on image eventually becomes exhausted because maintaining appearances requires constant effort. The person who focuses on character experiences something different. They become increasingly authentic because authenticity requires less maintenance than performance. There is no role to remember. There is no mask to maintain. There is only alignment between values and actions. Perhaps this is why Marcus Aurelius repeatedly returned to the same question throughout his writings. He did not ask whether people admired him. He did not ask whether people approved of him. He did not ask whether people agreed with him. Instead, he continually asked whether he was living according to the principles he believed were right. That question redirected attention away from external validation and toward internal responsibility. It reminded him that the quality of a life is determined not by applause, but by character. As you continue this journey, you may begin noticing that many of the things you once chased lose their urgency. The need to be understood immediately begins fading. The need to defend every decision begins fading. The need to win every disagreement begins fading. In their place emerges something quieter but infinitely more powerful. A growing confidence that does not depend upon constant reassurance. A growing stability that does not depend upon perfect circumstances. A growing self-respect that remains intact regardless of who approves and who disapproves. And once that self-respect becomes established, you no longer need to force influence because influence begins emerging naturally from the way you carry yourself, the way you communicate, the way you establish boundaries, and the way you remain steady when others become reactive. What people often call quiet power is rarely mysterious. It is usually the visible result of years spent developing an internal foundation strong enough to remain stable even when external conditions are not. That foundation is what the Stoics spent their lives building. It is also what most people spend their lives searching for without realizing that it cannot be found in approval, praise, popularity, or validation. It can only be built from within, one deliberate choice at a time. Eventually, every person who begins this journey arrives at a point where the challenge is no longer setting boundaries, expressing opinions, or resisting the need for constant approval. The deeper challenge becomes learning how to remain steady when life refuses to cooperate with your expectations. This is where Stoicism moves beyond social dynamics and enters something far more profound. It enters the realm of inner freedom. Because if you examine most forms of suffering closely enough, you will often discover that they originate from the same source. They originate from attachment. Not attachment to people necessarily, although that can certainly be part of it. Not attachment to possessions, although that can also play a role. The attachment that causes the greatest instability is attachment to outcomes. Many people spend their entire lives believing that peace will arrive once certain conditions are met. They tell themselves they will finally relax when they achieve a particular goal, when a relationship improves, when they receive recognition, when they gain financial security, when someone finally understands them, or when life unfolds according to the plans they have carefully constructed in their minds. The problem is that life rarely follows those plans. Even when one goal is achieved, another immediately appears. Even when one problem is solved, another eventually emerges. Even when one source of uncertainty disappears, new uncertainties inevitably take its place. If peace depends on favorable outcomes, peace remains permanently vulnerable because outcomes are never fully within our control. This realization formed the foundation of Stoic philosophy. The Stoics did not seek peace through controlling circumstances. They sought peace through changing their relationship with circumstances. They understood that suffering often begins when we demand that reality conform to our preferences. We want people to behave a certain way. We want situations to unfold according to our expectations. We want uncertainty to disappear. We want discomfort to end. We want guarantees where no guarantees exist. When reality inevitably refuses to cooperate, frustration emerges. The greater the attachment, the greater the frustration. This does not mean abandoning goals or becoming indifferent to life. It means learning to separate effort from outcome. It means committing fully to what is within your control while releasing the illusion that everything else can be controlled as well. Marcus Aurelius understood this principle deeply. Despite holding immense power, he knew that countless variables remained beyond his influence. He could make decisions, but he could not dictate every consequence. He could act with wisdom, but he could not guarantee universal agreement. He could pursue justice, but he could not eliminate every injustice. His peace depended not on controlling results, but on controlling his conduct. The approval seeker struggles with this lesson because approval itself is an outcome. The desire to be liked is ultimately the desire to influence how others perceive us. The desire to be understood is the desire to influence how others interpret us. The desire to be validated is the desire to influence how others respond to us. These outcomes may seem reasonable, but they remain partially outside our control. As long as emotional well-being depends upon them, emotional stability remains fragile. This is why so many people experience constant anxiety in social situations. They are not merely participating in conversations, they are attempting to manage outcomes. They are attempting to secure approval, avoid rejection, prevent misunderstanding, and maintain favorable perceptions simultaneously. The mental effort required is enormous. When you begin releasing attachment to outcomes, an extraordinary shift occurs. Conversations become simpler, decisions become clearer, relationships become healthier. You stop carrying responsibilities that never belonged to you in the first place. You stop treating every interaction as a test of your worth. You stop interpreting every disagreement as a threat to your identity. Instead, you begin focusing on what the Stoics considered the only thing truly worth mastering: your own character. Character becomes increasingly important because it remains available regardless of circumstances. A person can lose status, they can lose wealth, they can lose opportunities, they can lose approval, they can lose admiration, yet character remains available as long as they continue choosing it. This is why the Stoics viewed character as the ultimate source of stability. Everything else fluctuates. Character can remain constant. As this understanding deepens, another interesting change begins taking place. You become less concerned with being impressive and more concerned with being effective. Many people spend years trying to create a particular image. They want to appear confident, they want to appear successful, they want to appear influential. Yet the pursuit of image often creates a subtle form of insecurity because maintaining an image requires constant monitoring. Every interaction becomes a performance. Every conversation becomes an opportunity to protect a reputation. Every criticism becomes a threat to an identity that depends upon perception. The Stoics approached life differently. They focused on becoming rather than appearing. They understood that appearance eventually follows substance. When character strengthens, confidence follows. When discipline strengthens, influence follows. When self-respect strengthens, reputation follows. The order matters because many people attempt to reverse it. They chase the appearance of confidence without developing the habits that create confidence. They chase the appearance of influence without developing the character that creates influence. They chase the appearance of strength without developing the resilience that creates strength. This is one reason why strategic silence becomes so powerful. Most people speak because they feel compelled to manage perception. They explain because they fear misunderstanding. They justify because they fear judgment. They defend because they fear criticism. Silence becomes uncomfortable because silence removes their ability to influence how others interpret them. Yet silence often communicates more confidence than endless explanation ever could. Silence demonstrates trust. It demonstrates trust in your decisions, trust in your values, trust in your ability to tolerate uncertainty. Consider how often people weaken their own position by saying too much. They explain beyond what is necessary. They defend beyond what is required. They justify beyond what is useful. The more they speak, the more opportunities they create for insecurity to reveal itself. The Stoics understood that words should serve a purpose. They should clarify, guide, teach, or contribute. They should not exist merely to relieve personal anxiety. When speech becomes a tool for managing discomfort, it often loses its effectiveness. This does not mean silence in every situation. It means intentional communication. It means speaking because there is something valuable to say, rather than because silence feels uncomfortable. It means understanding that not every criticism requires a response, not every misunderstanding requires correction, and not every opinion requires engagement. Some situations improve through action, some improve through dialogue, others improve through simply allowing time to do its work. As people develop this level of emotional discipline, they often notice something fascinating. The things that once consumed enormous amounts of mental energy begin losing their significance. They stop replaying conversations repeatedly. They stop analyzing every interaction. They stop carrying other people's opinions into every corner of their lives. Their attention becomes available for more meaningful pursuits. Creativity improves, focus improves, relationships improve, peace improves. Not because life becomes easier, but because less energy is wasted fighting realities that cannot be controlled. The Stoics often reminded themselves of the temporary nature of existence. This was not intended to create pessimism. It was intended to create perspective. When viewed against the vastness of time, many of the concerns that dominate daily life begin appearing much smaller than they initially seemed. The criticism that felt devastating becomes temporary. The embarrassment that felt overwhelming becomes temporary. The rejection that felt permanent becomes temporary. Even success itself becomes temporary. Everything passes. Understanding this truth changes how we relate to both triumph and difficulty. We stop clinging so tightly. We stop fearing so intensely. We begin participating in life more fully because we are no longer trying to control every aspect of it. This perspective ultimately leads to one of the most powerful forms of confidence a person can develop. Not the confidence that comes from knowing everything will work out perfectly. Not the confidence that comes from believing failure is impossible, but the confidence that comes from knowing you can handle whatever happens. This confidence does not depend on circumstances. It depends on resilience. It depends on character. It depends on the repeated experience of facing challenges, surviving them, learning from them, and continuing forward. By this stage of the journey, the original question has transformed completely. At the beginning, the focus was on why being excessively nice often leads to disappointment. The focus was on approval, boundaries, and social dynamics. Those topics remain important, but they were never the final destination. They were only the doorway. The deeper lesson has always been about freedom. Freedom from unnecessary fear. Freedom from emotional dependence. Freedom from the constant need to manage perceptions. Freedom from allowing external circumstances to dictate internal stability. The person who reaches this point does not become cold. They do not become indifferent. They do not become detached from humanity. In many ways, they become more compassionate because their kindness is no longer driven by fear. Their generosity becomes more genuine because it is no longer motivated by the need for approval. Their relationships become healthier because they are no longer built upon dependency. Their confidence becomes more authentic because it is rooted in character rather than validation. This is the quiet power the Stoics spent their lives cultivating. It does not attract attention the way arrogance does. It does not announce itself the way insecurity often does. It is subtle, it is calm, it is steady, yet its effects are unmistakable. People trust it, people respect it, people feel it. Not because it seeks recognition, but because it no longer needs recognition to exist. And perhaps that is the greatest transformation of all. You begin this journey believing that the goal is to stop being taken advantage of. You continue it by learning how to establish boundaries, tolerate discomfort, and release the need for constant approval. But if you remain committed long enough, you eventually discover that the true reward is something far greater than influence, respect, or social leverage. The true reward is becoming someone who can remain grounded regardless of what happens around them. When praise arrives, you remain grounded. When criticism arrives, you remain grounded. When success arrives, you remain grounded. When failure arrives, you remain grounded. When people understand you, you remain grounded. When people misunderstand you, you remain grounded. Your stability no longer depends on circumstances because it is rooted in something deeper than circumstances. It is rooted in character. And once a character becomes your foundation, the game changes completely. You stop acting nice in order to survive socially. You stop performing for approval. You stop negotiating your identity for acceptance. Instead, you begin living according to principles that remain steady regardless of changing opinions and changing conditions. That is the Stoic path. Not a path toward popularity, not a path toward universal approval, but a path toward freedom. And freedom, once discovered, is worth far more than being liked. Thank you for spending this time with me, and thank you for being a part of Psychresto Mind. As you leave this video, remember that your life changes the moment you stop asking the world for permission to be yourself. The moment you stop chasing approval, stop explaining every decision, stop shrinking to make others comfortable, and start standing firmly in your own values, everything begins to shift. Not because the world suddenly becomes easier, but because you become stronger. There will always be people who misunderstand you, doubt you, criticize you, or walk away. But none of that has the power to define you unless you hand them that power. Your peace is not in being liked, your strength is not in being accepted, and your worth is not determined by anyone's opinion. True freedom begins when your character becomes stronger than your fear, when your principles become louder than your need for approval, and when your self-respect becomes non-negotiable. Keep moving forward, keep trusting the path you're building, and remember that the strongest people are not the ones who control others. They are the ones who have learned to master themselves. Until next time, take care of yourself, stay grounded, and never forget that the moment you stop living for validation is the moment you truly begin living for yourself.